anybody who has money to invest, who either is investing or should be investing, those are the people we want to be capturing. We've got AI in the picture now. Technology is always moving forward. Have a pride in supporting those brands and helping to build those brands as well. The overall TV campaign, we had 677,000 impressions. And through that, we were reaching around 64% of the target retail audience that we wanted to go after.
That's fantastic. Welcome to The Growth Engine. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Lago from Allianz Global Investors. Ollie, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, David.
Allianz Investment Trust. There's 3 investment trusts that sit as part of the group. So we have Merchants, we have ATT, and we have Brunner Investment Trust. So those are the products. Essentially, 3 individual companies that sit under the master brand. But your role and responsibility within Allianz is addressing the retail side. Is that correct?
By and large, yes. I mean, we look at the professional side as well, but the lion's share of what we do from a marketing perspective is looking at the retail investor. That's really the growth area for investment trusts, has been for a long time. Actually, it's something that we've looked at for a long time. But yes, that's in the main. That's what I'm spending most of my time on.
Yeah. So that's a competitive space, and I think for many people working within marketing, they find that a complex space to work in. I often find asset managers a lot more comfortable selling in institutional, professional, but when it comes to retail, it can often be a challenge.
I think having worked in the industry a long time, I think that there's been a bit of a cycle, but it's quite interesting now because I think everyone's recognizing that, the power, if you like, that's in retail or the opportunity, let's put it that way, that's in retail. And you can see this almost like an upswing again in the desire to be playing in that space.
I'm keen to sort of talk about the marketing campaign for Allianz. Now, I find this interesting because it's 3 individual companies doing slightly different things, but also following a common path. So let's start at the beginning. What was the challenge that you and the team at Allianz were trying to address with this campaign?
I think we were trying to re-energize what we were doing to get real relevancy in there for investors, to make sure that we're hitting the right notes for investors, really. We'd been through a period where we'd done very well over a period of probably almost 10 years, I would say, in terms of bringing retail investors onto the registers of those 3 trusts. But I think you never rest on your laurels. You always need to think about what's next. And interestingly, just a few minutes ago, and you mentioned it being a competitive space. I think actually I've seen that changing over recent years. So there's always been some competition there, of course, but actually as people wake up more and more to that opportunity, there is more and more competition. So that trajectory of the competition within that sector has definitely become more and harder to deal with. So I think all the time it's an evolving piece. You need to be evolving what you're doing to access that market effectively.
Is there anything about the rethink on how you communicated with the end retail investor? Was there any shift in that perspective?
I think one of the things for me that's absolutely key is trying to move away from shouting, "Hey, here's our product," to, what are we doing for you? Now, I think, most marketers will recognize that as kind of a key tenet. Actually, a lot of business people will recognize that as a key strategic thing. It's not, it's not about, "Hey, we're here and our product's great." It's what can we offer you? What's our service? What's our product? So, for a long time, we've been thinking about elements like this, but definitely part of this campaign was thinking, how are we saying to the customers that are out there what we're doing for them? How, what problem are we solving for them? What does this product do for you? Not just it's a great product doing X.
It's almost a kind of, I guess, customer first approach, thinking about their issues.
Yeah. I'm a strong believer in that. I think, that's, I don't think there's another way to do it, really, if you want to do it well. I think, interestingly, we work in an industry which has been slow to get there. I think now, again, with this competition in the space, you can see it happening more and more as people realize that element. And actually, it's not just in the consumer side as well, it's in B2B marketing as well. But I think traditionally, I would say the industry, asset management industry, has been quite slow to get there. There's been a big swathe of it that has just been, here's another poster about our product and what it does, rather than thinking, as a client, as a customer, what's your motivation and how are we going to dial into that?
Yeah, yeah. Amongst the UK retail investor base, you'd spend a lot of time already as a business nurturing that target of the investor base. But can you talk through how you started to modernize and change the digital engagement with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I suppose, just to take a step back as well, one of the interesting things is that there tends to always be this tendency to do exactly that. You say, well, we're addressing the retail investor. Now, that's actually a massive spectrum, from one end to the other is you wouldn't recognize them as the same people necessarily. The top end of your retail investors can be as knowledgeable as some professional investors. Yeah. The very starting point of that are people who are very nervously taking their first steps, into investing at all. And that's a real difference, a real huge spectrum. It's a huge spectrum that you're trying to deal with. Therein lies a problem in itself. But I think, one of the unassailable truths, I guess, is that stepping away from that almost, life has just become more digital. Mm-hmm. So everyone is in those digital spaces. If you want to address people, doesn't matter actually whether they're professionals, retails, or where they are on that spectrum of retail, you've got to be in the digital space. Yeah. You've got to be in the right digital spaces. So you've got to understand that as well. You've got to understand what spaces you want to be in and how that's going to work for you. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you talk about the spectrum of the types of investors, and how did you kind of hone in on the right type of individual for each different trust? Were they the same for across trusts, or were they different types of clients that you identified?
There's a little bit of difference between the trusts. The trusts have different investment focus for each of them, and that necessarily means that the people who are going to look for them are slightly different, especially where I suppose Merchants and Brunner, that they're different, but they both generate an income. So there's some similarity about the people who will be looking for that element of it. Allianz Technology Trust, very different, very growth oriented, very focused on tech. Obviously, it does what it does on the tin. So you've got quite a different person potentially who's looking for that. So that there is a differential definitely, and it was just a case I suppose of doing some research, looking at those elements. Trying to build some personas as well, and really think about what those investors look like, both in terms of what our typical investors look like, but also what an aspirational investor might look like. And, we had hours of debate around what does a younger investor mean? Because again, in terms of terms that are bandied around a lot, you hear that a lot, we need to access a younger investor. And I think, it's one of those interesting ones. If you drop that in the middle of the table and said to everyone they can't talk to each other and they need to write down what that means, a table of 10 people, you'd get 10 different answers probably of what that means to people, because psychologically it means something different to everyone. And, so we needed some coherence around that, even in terms of, of directing strategy. Okay, yes, we want to go after potentially a younger audience to what we've typically done or typically been pursuing, but what does that actually mean? And actually, even then it means a range of things, because you have what we said was probably younger investor meant to us, which was actually not far off what our typical investor was, but there's the people entering that profile. Yeah. And they're probably the more profitable ones. But there is also the actual younger investor in absolute terms. You know, and you want to be trying to access that as well, but it's a very different outcome.
It's moved a long way. I remember when I first started coming into this industry and listening to people talk about retail, the name that was always given to the retail investor was Mrs. Miggins. And I just heard that and I was almost like, who the hell's Mrs. Miggins? Everyone keeps talking about her. It was almost done in a sort of slightly disparaging term because there was, certainly when I came into the industry, the focus really was on the professional side, and the retail was this slightly awkward bit on that you had to, but as you say, there's been a complete shift in the way that the industry thinks. And again, the sophistication of the defining of those target segments within the spectrum that you talk about.
We're talking about this huge spectrum that we've been discussing, and actually the people we're talking about are us. You know, it is anybody, any professional, not just in this industry, anybody who has money to invest, who either is investing or should be investing. You know, those are the people we want to be capturing. We should be capturing.
You talked about insights and data to inform the strategy. How did you gain insights and data before you actually started developing, I guess, the tactics to implement the strategy?
Some of it we already had, and some we went out and did some additional research on. We did a piece of research which was in a way staple to consumer duty. We said we wanted to look at how people were working their way through our website and whether they were able to find certain information or not. But that yielded some information, you know, in terms of clarity, usability, and so on, that meant that we could steer what we were looking at in terms of campaign assets as well.
There's also there's a rapid evolution in the way that people research and find information as well, though. You know, we've been going through a digital evolution in the background to all of this, haven't we? So I guess and still continue to do so. I mean, way that the marketing world looked 5 years ago compared to how it looks a year ago compared to how it looks 3 weeks ago, it keeps maneuvering.
Massively, and you know it is going to continue on that pace, I suppose. You know, we've got AI in the picture now as well. You know, we've already been looking at that with various partners and agencies and research agencies as well, in terms of, you know, what does that look like for consumers? How much are consumers using it? What does that trajectory look like? You know, when does SEO start to turn into AEO, GEO, all of the other acronyms that are out there at the moment, you know, in terms of adapting your strategy that you've got at the moment.
It's something that keeps us on our toes, shall we say. Let's go back to the campaign and thinking about the different audience types. Now, when you think about the retail investor space and you think about the specific campaigns that you have to run for the three trusts, what differences did you see between people that are kind of, you know, early awareness stage versus, right, let's get down, I'm ready to make a purchase decision? Is there any different way that you go about?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, in psychological terms, I guess, in terms of what you're putting in front of them, yes. So in terms of the content, what it looks like, but I think in the way they act as well, and that was borne out in the research pieces that we looked at. You know, somebody who is closer to it, who is researching. I mean, you talked about, you know, how people research now in digital channels for that. That is very different to somebody who's just kind of looking for something that might do something for them. They think they want to invest, and they're kind of interested in X.
It's window shopping, isn't it?
Yeah, almost window shopping. And we've done research pieces which have completely shown that divergence, where you get you can show the same page to that two ends of the spectrum that you've just asked about, and let's say it's kind of a generic landing page with your a nice glossy video on it. The person who's window shopping, and I quite like that phrase, generally receives it very well. Okay, that gave me a nice intro. I kind of understand now. Thank you very much. The person who's close to that purchase decision is like, bump, you've just put bump in front of me. I've, that's just wasted my time. I really dislike this. So it's not as applicable to them. It's almost a turn off.
Right. It can go the other way.
The other way, yeah, because actually they're just looking for, I want, these 4 or 5 hard facts, which are on my spreadsheet of the 3 companies I'm potentially looking at buying. And I want to, just know these numbers or know these facts or whatever it is. Yeah. And you're, probably 2 paragraphs on your manager's latest view. It's a completely different mindset to the person over here. We need to take, because you need to cover that, but we need to take people from here to here. We need to think about the journeys as well.
Yep.
So the person who is just looking for that, can they find that easily? And, we've done some of that work to date, but I'll be completely honest, we haven't done all of it. And there's always room for improvement. And I think you kind of see that constantly as well. And I've seen, some of our competitors have put up, really good site redesigns, over the past year or so. And I think it's something that we'll probably see more and more of happening, I'm sure, as that kind of takes hold really and grips everyone, and everyone sees the power of really thinking about that, not just, having a basic site and throwing all your stuff on there and letting people kind of select. You need
really
to
considering their route through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, fascinating. In my experience, boards all kind of want to be very, very differentiated, but there's also a kind of challenge of being linked back to the master brand. So they want the halo effect of being over a large global brand like Allianz, but also want the individuality of being their own company. Any words of advice that you can give on how you manage that process?
Not really. It's a massive balancing act.
Yeah.
And you've actually kind of given the answer there almost, which is exactly that. There are benefits to each side of that, of the coin. And it's not necessarily the same from even one piece of activity to the next.
Right. So
for us, what we do is we try and provide a very bespoke service for our 3 client trusts. That's something that's been a key tenet of how the business unit has been set up at Allianz for a very long time. Actually predates me, really. Right. I've tried to carry on that strategy. But it is a balance, and it is a debate. Sometimes it can be a debate with your boards or the boards of the trust, and it can be a debate internally within the asset manager. Sometimes asset managers that have certain things centralized can become very touchy about, well, you're doing something differently there. It needs to look like this, and then you have an internal education piece, which says, this is not a product. This is, and you said it right at the start of the podcast, this is an independent company that we are lucky enough to have the mandate for. And, if they've got a very strong feeling on a particular thing, we could, if we disagree, we can try and educate and move that. But actually, if we think, fair enough, they've got a bit of a point on that, then we need to make that happen as much as we can. So there's a real, there is a real balance between the interests of the trust and the interests of the company. And it does come down to all of those things. Actually, when we're doing that balance internally, or we're doing an education internally about the trusts and what they do, is, it's not been something that is making us feel uncomfortable to do within the organization. We're proud to have those companies on our books. They're great companies, and that therefore we have a pride in supporting those brands and helping to build those brands as well.
So let's start diving into I guess the specifics of each individual trust, and I guess the creative focus of each. You said that Merchants and Brunner have income related focus on their investment strategies. But is there anything more you can tell us which differentiates between the three trusts?
Yeah, I mean, just a very broad brush. Merchants Trust is UK equity income, so invests in the UK market predominantly. Has a small sleeve. It can invest overseas if it wants to, aims to provide a good total return for investors. But a big part of that is the income stream that it provides. It's got a good yield on it, and it's raised the dividend every year for 43 years, which is a great record. It's one of the AIC's dividend heroes, they call it, which are companies that have raised a dividend for over 20 years every year. And, I think that was something that showed itself in general. This is not just for our trust, but in general as a benefit in COVID, when suddenly, everything was slashed.
Yeah.
But investment trusts were able to, if they had the revenue reserves to back it, were able to carry on paying their dividends through that. Going back to the very original point we were making about client customer needs, people who are investing with you for an income and they need that income.
Yeah.
That's a really important point.
And a huge selling point.
A huge selling point. And I know it's something that boards spend an awful lot of time thinking about. It's not just a throwaway thing. They spend an awful lot of time thinking about what that next dividend is going to be. But that's so we've got Merchants Trust. Brunner is a global equity trust. Invests, as the name says, anywhere in the world. It's also got an income focus as well, though, and is also a dividend hero, actually one of the longest running dividend heroes. So it's got a 53-year unbroken record of raising the dividend, and sort of a really nice story there, where they really balance the investment styles within it. It's kind of had this tag for a long while of being an all-weather investment trust. It's not looking to necessarily follow a particular style and absolutely shoot the lights out when that style is going really well, but just to generally perform well through various cycles. And then finally we have Allianz Technology Trust. It kind of the name gives it away, really. Technology is an incredible sector. And in terms of, I suppose, the creatives that we were looking at, if I kind of go backwards, then technology, was all about looking to the future. That's what it's all about. Technology is always moving forward. I mean, it's you can write something, I guess, and it's almost out of date the next day. It's not quite like that, but it feels like that sometimes. So it was all about this idea of the trust is trying to capture the future, basically, and that future growth. Brunner really was about that all-weather portfolio feeling, and really taking that to the market and saying this is what it's about, really describing what that means. It's very nice. You can put up lots of pictures that illustrate all-weather, but we really wanted to explain from the core what that means for investors. And then Merchants really, again, going back to the key proposition of that. I mean, the one thing I didn't say is that's a value style that they follow, and have very consistently followed that style for many, many years.
How did you balance then to understand the three trusts and three creative, I guess, articulations of the strategy of each investment strategy of each trust? How did you then, from a marketing point of view, both work for long-term brand building versus short-term sales generation? What were the different tactics that you started to employ, and different channels that you used to implement them in?
I suppose materials that we were looking at creating that were longer burn pieces were more evergreen. And I mean, I guess this, you know, in some ways, I hate the word campaign because it was so multifaceted what we were doing. And, you know, there was definitely an always on element, and some of the early evergreen, so to speak, pieces that we did are still running for us now. And
this is run over multiple years.
Yes. Yeah. Which was part of the strategy at the outset, was one that, you know, this is a build. So you layer, you know, you're layering those base elements with certain campaign elements on top of that.
Yeah.
To actually, you know, amplify the end result rather than just dripping in bits.
Yeah. Because I guess that helps from a budget point of view, because to do lots of these things, it takes budget to do. But if you can spread that cost over several years as opposed to one, it's probably...
It does help from that perspective. Plus you have that ability in an interim sense to prove where you're going, to have some interim results that you can say, okay, this is on target or above, below, wherever it is, but we know, you know, where we want to go from that. You have some proof points in there as well to underpin carrying on with the strategy. Yeah. You
mentioned at the top, you started auditing, you did consumer duty testing to identify within the customer journey where it was working well, what wasn't working well, defined, I guess, value propositions for each trust to make them distinct within their space. And then you say you built campaign or built assets over a multi-year way in order to give you the firepower, I guess, to have that always on methodology. What mediums did you utilize for different parts?
So a lot of it was video, but also we did audio. And we looked at written pieces as well that back that up. But I suppose it was, you know, that's just the mechanism. Really what we were looking at was, you know, what are the key tenets of those campaigns? What are we message are we trying to put out there? And then we're looking at those different pieces that could really support that and how they worked together.
Okay.
So part of that, you know, again, is going back to the earlier bit, I suppose, that we talked about those customer journeys. You know, how is somebody going to come in? What's going to attract them out of the pieces that we're doing? Where are they going to come into? So what's your landing page or landing area? What does that look like? What supporting pieces do we have on there? How are we drawing people through then? Where are they going to go from there? You know, again, there was lots of discussion about the actual route to market as such. You know, investment trusts are a very strange beast. It's not retail as in you're selling a product. You can't put you can put a buy it now button, but it's not, you know, literally a transactional piece that you can do.
I've known that you also did broadcast as part of the campaign mix. What was the reasoning behind deciding to use broadcast, and how did you go about that?
So we used Sky TV, Sky AdSmart, actually, and it was quite interesting because, again, you know, you talk about the speed in which things move and change, and that was something. I mean, I don't think you need to go back many years at all until you know, broadcast was truly broadcast. So, you know, I think actually it's a bit of an anomalous term as well to call it broadcast. But, you know, at one point broadcast was broadcast, and none of us ever had the budgets for that. You know,
terrestrial TV,
exactly. You know, some firms had a very big central budget to do some elements on proper broadcast, and that was fine. And we all looked from afar and went, you know, wish I could do that one day. And then actually with the rise of streaming services, all of a sudden you've got all of these packages available where it can be much more targeted for you. So you can go along and you can say, going back to our personas point, this is what we're trying to reach. And they've got a set of buckets, if you like, that you can access, and you go, yep, we want that one, and that one. And we want it on this frequency, these numbers over this timescale, and you get a cost. And actually, when we looked at it, we're like, yeah, that cost is quite reasonable. there were hurdles, definitely, but it was, like I say, it was really interesting to be able to access that that market and something we hadn't done before. And I think very anecdotal, but a great moment was going into a board meeting and the chair saying, "I saw an advert for our trust last night."
Oh, wonderful! It sounds like there's been a lot of quite a seismic shift change in these different tactics that you've employed over several years. How have compliance teams managed this?
I think where we've started to do new things, or things that are new to them, we've tried to take them along on that journey as much as possible. We've got a very fair and compliance department. They don't often give us a lot of trouble, if the trouble is the right word, with things. But one of the things they are very worried about is when we talk about single stocks.
Right.
So I think I kind of remember the day of going to them and saying we want to record stock stories with the managers. There was definitely a sharp intake of breath from that side of the fence, but we brought them in, sat with ourselves, agency, compliance, and discussed it, put examples up on the screen of what other companies were doing, got their assessment on whether they would have passed that or not, and if not, why not. And actually then got to a point where we had an agreement both on disclaimers that we would need up front. And we actually, for those early ones we actually pre-scripted them as well. So they had the chance to say yes or no on the elements that we would be talking about in there. So they were bought in from the start, basically, and that that worked really, really well. Which is, I suppose, you would kind of expect it. It's in some instances, I suppose, compliance have a very hard task in that they are the end of the journey, and they get given a fait accompli in some ways, and said, please sign that off. And sometimes it might not be what they want to see in there. I think if they understand from the start what's coming down the track at them, then that can be a much easier conversation at that end point. It's probably just tweaking the margins, really.
It's almost like a co-creation in a way.
A little bit, yeah.
And just going back to the TV, were you pleased with the results that you gained there?
Very pleased. I mean, the what's interesting about Sky AdSmart is you get the broadcast, to use that vernacular element of it, which is just a number of impressions, but you also get it put out on the Sky app. So if you're a Sky customer, it knows that you're not only watching the TV at whatever time, and it's going to serve within a certain window, but it also knows you're on the app, so you will get ad repeats on the app as well. And actually there you do get the click data through from that. We had some comparisons as well with some other major campaigns, sort of major financial services brands that were out there, and we'd done really, really well. One of the campaigns actually surpassing some really big names out there for clicks on the app version. So we were really, really pleased with that. And sort of, just really pleased as well, even without the data side, actually, to step into something a little bit new and just to be trying some of these things as well, and get a few different executions on the plate.
Explain a little bit more about the creative execution of a stock story.
Sure. Well, what we decided to do was go for video. Again, we want to show our managers there to people. A big element, I think, even before this campaign, of what we're trying to do is put our managers in front of people. Right. I'm a big believer in people by people. Yeah. And so trust is a big element of that. And, apart from going to an event like an AGM and seeing the manager and being able to talk to the manager, the next best thing is seeing them on video or on a webinar. And also it gives you the opportunity to illustrate more things about the company as well, if you want to put some B-roll in there to really, you know, illustrate the point. So that was our kind of ethos from the start, was to do it, you know, that was the best way, the best route to market. And it also plays into some of the stuff we've been talking about as well, in terms of how people are consuming pieces as well, and consuming information.
I guess it's kind of amplifying their reach in a way, isn't it? Getting them in front of more eyeballs.
They were short videos in the end, or relatively short. So they're always the thing that you can take little sound bites out of as well. And, you know, that lends itself to social and so on as well. There were probably some elements where we want to see more improvement than where we've got to. You know, had interesting strategic conversations on that in terms of, you know, where can we go from here? But we've definitely had good results as well, both at the macro level, if you like, in terms of what we were trying to achieve. So one of the big elements we were trying to achieve was increases in our search traffic. You know, there was a big increase in terms of organic search traffic over the period we've been running this. That was one of the things we were trying to get to, definitely. And yes, one of the other things we did was almost like a mini brand tracker, I suppose, for awareness, as you said. And that definitely, again, showed an uplift in there. Individual pieces as well have performed well. So we've had, you know, like we said with the Sky TV example, we had that. We've had with the stock stories where we've published them in different places, we've had really good individual performances on different publishers' sites with those as well.
You've gone through quite a process with this, and I think that it feels to me that you're quite advanced with the way that you approach digital activation towards retail investors. What advice would you share with other asset managers that are maybe not as advanced in their thinking? What words of wisdom would you give to those?
I think just to take a step in. Resources, budgets are finite to an element, to a sense. And so that there are lots more things that we would like to do. So, you know, at the end of the day, we're doing these things to grow, and growth brings revenue with it. So, you know, I don't think we should ever be looking to do any of these things just because we fancy doing them, because they're nice and fun. We're doing them for an objective, which is to improve revenue flows and to grow. Yeah. So I think it's, you know, it's very possible just, you know, to start to move into it. I think it can be daunting, but I think once you start to do some of these elements, there's a clarity that comes with it as well. I suppose just the frustrating element is you see the myriad of different things you could be doing as well, or want to do, and you know, sometimes maybe that stack looks a lot larger than they have already done the stack. But you know, that's life as well.
So what additional elements would those be that sits in that other list of would like to do's?
A big one for us is social. We've dipped our toe, I would say, with social. We haven't pushed in as far as maybe we would like. Again, that's, you know, that's been a case for us of working out where the resource is best placed, and the money is best spent at the moment. But we've definitely got an ambition to do more in terms of social. And again, looping back to some of the stuff we were saying earlier, when you think about that audience spectrum and you think about the new modalities of the ways people are consuming information, you know, there is a shift in that direction as well. It definitely needs to be part of the piece. So it's something we're trying to think about more and more. But all of these things, you know, take effort, take resource, take money. You know, you will have that element where there will be things like that, whether it's social, whether it's video, whether it's, you know, podcasts, whatever it is. There will be things that maybe you've seen or heard other people do and think, yeah, I'd love to do that. And there's probably always a judgment call on whether you can actually get there quickly, soon, or whether it's going to take a little bit more time to get that on the plate.
Yeah. Thank you, Ollie, for sharing the story of Allianz Investment Trust and a shift to digital campaign to retail audiences. You may have noticed we have a bookcase behind us full of little reminders of different guests that we have on the show. Anything that you can share that we can put up to remind us?
We will definitely raid our goodie cupboard for something for you.
Fantastic.
And get you something to put on there as well. Yeah. And taking a quick look to see who's got something really flashy, and we'll make sure we get something flashier.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening today to The Growth Engine. If you enjoyed this episode and like to hear more, please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from, and follow us on LinkedIn for regular updates or on hubagency.co.uk. Thank you, and see you next time.